Welcome to Lanterman Lullaby. Settle into a comfortable position and allow the sound of rain and the gentle rhythm of the railway to soften everything beyond this moment. Tonight, your journey begins beneath the grey autumn skies of Vancouver, where a long-distance sleeper train is waiting to carry you east across Canada. You'll settle into your quiet compartment, watch the rain-covered city disappear beyond the window, and let the railway carry you beside wide rivers, through misty valleys, and deep into the towering Canadian Rockies. Then the mountains will gradually give way to the enormous open prairies, where golden fields stretch beneath endless skies, before the landscape changes once more into the lakes, granite shores, and rich autumn forests of northern Ontario. And after days of peaceful travel, with the colours of fall passing gently beyond the glass, the railway will carry you through the final miles towards Toronto. So get comfortable, let the day drift away, and when you're ready, step aboard for tonight's dream journey on the autumn train across Canada. Tonight's journey begins on a wet autumn afternoon in Vancouver. Rain has been falling for hours, steady and unhurried, leaving the streets dark and reflective beneath the soft grey sky. Pavements shine beneath shop lights and passing traffic. The air feels cool and fresh, touched with the clean scent that follows a long spell of rain. You make your way through the city at an easy pace, with no need to rush. This is not the hurried beginning of an ordinary journey. There is no crowded airport terminal ahead, no long queue at security, no pressure to arrive before a gate closes. Only a railway station, an afternoon train, and the quiet promise of many miles still to come. Somewhere beyond the rain and the low Vancouver skyline, your sleeper train is already waiting. In a little while, it will carry you east across forests, mountains, open prairie, and the deep autumn landscapes of Canada. But for now, there is only this first simple moment. The city softened by rain, your journey not yet begun, and the feeling that the whole country still lies ahead. Soon the station comes into view through the rain. Its broad facade appears beyond the trees and the shining pavement, solid and calm against the silver afternoon. Water runs down the stone steps and gathers in shallow pools near the entrance. The windows glow gently from within, offering warmth against the damp coolness outside. People come and go beneath the shelter of the overhang, some moving quickly to escape the rain, others lingering for a moment before stepping inside. Suitcases roll softly over the wet ground. A few taxis pull away into the traffic. Yet even here, there is none of the tense urgency that so often surrounds travel. The station feels composed, almost restful, as though it understands that rail journeys begin best when nothing is hurried. You pause for a moment before entering, listening to the rain tap lightly on the surrounding surfaces. The sound seems to set the rhythm for the evening ahead, measured, steady, and untroubled. Then, with the journey calling quietly onward, you step towards the doors. Inside, the station feels warmer at once. The air is dry and still, carrying the faint mixed scent of polished floors, damp coats, and coffee drifting from somewhere nearby. Light falls softly across the concourse, where travelers move with the subdued calm that belongs to rail stations more than airports. There is space here to breathe, space to slow down, space to feel the journey beginning one quiet step at a time. You pass beneath the high ceiling and across the smooth floor, hearing the soft murmur of distant conversations and the rolling rhythm of wheels over tile. Nothing feels rushed. The train is not leaving in minutes. There is time enough to cross the hall, to notice the warmth of the lighting, the shelter from the rain, and the gentle sense of anticipation gathering within the station. For a little while, you simply move through this calm indoor world, leaving the city weather behind without quite forgetting it. Beyond the concourse, somewhere on the platforms, the long silver sleeper train waits beneath the grey sky. Before heading out to the train, you pause beside a window. Rain continues to streak the glass outside, blurring the view of the platforms and tracks beyond. The world looks softened by weather, as though the city itself is gently fading into the background, making room for the journey to come. You listen for a moment to the muffled sounds of the station around you, while beyond the glass the long outlines of rail cars wait in the drizzle. There is something deeply comforting about the knowledge that tonight's journey has only one task: to carry you onward. No decisions need to be made now. No driving, no navigating, no planning the next turn in the road. Once aboard, the train will take care of all of that for you. You remain still for another moment, letting that thought settle. Then, as naturally as the turning of a page, you leave the window and continue towards the platform entrance. The platform air is cooler again, carrying the damp freshness of the rain. There, stretched along the track beneath the open station canopy, stands your train. The silver carriages seem almost luminous against the wet surroundings, their metal sides catching what little daylight remains. Long and still, the sleeper train waits with a kind of patient confidence, already suggesting distance, continuity, and the many landscapes that lie ahead. Rainwater glistens along the platform edge. Somewhere farther down, a door stands open beneath a warm interior light. The line of carriages feels almost endless from here, as though it could already contain the miles between Vancouver and Toronto folded quietly into itself. For a while, you do nothing more than look. The journey has been an idea until now, a place waiting somewhere beyond the city. But here it becomes real. A real train, real tracks, a real evening departure, and a private room that will soon become your small, moving home. You move slowly along the side of the train. The rain is lighter now, little more than a fine drifting mist, but the platform remains dark with moisture. Windows reflect the soft grey afternoon. Beneath them, the long stainless steel sides of the carriages carry a subdued shine. Every few moments, you pass another window and glimpse the warmly lit interior beyond. Seats, tables, curtains, and the quiet promise of comfort once the train begins to move. The scale of it feels part of the experience already. This is not a short evening service between nearby cities. It is a transcontinental train, a rail journey measured not in a few hours, but in days. Even before boarding, the thought begins to settle into you. There will be time aboard for the landscape to change completely, time for daylight to become night, for the mountains to arrive, for one province to give way to another. By the time you reach your carriage, you are no longer merely approaching the train. In some gentle way, you have already begun to belong to it. At last you step aboard. The change is immediate. Outside, the platform is cool, wet, and open to the grey sky. Inside, everything narrows into warmth. The corridor is softly lit, lined with polished surfaces, muted colours, and the subdued quiet that belongs to sleeper trains before departure. The faint scent of clean linen and warmed metal hangs in the air. Behind you, the platform remains visible only for a moment through the doorway before it closes away. The station sounds become muffled at once. What remains is an interior world of carpets, curtains, and low voices, already separate from the city outside. You move along the corridor at an unhurried pace. The train feels steady and self-contained beneath your feet, as though the motion has not yet begun, but the journey already exists around you. Somewhere ahead is your cabin, waiting with its window, its small table, and the first private view of the country you are about to cross. The corridor seems to lengthen gently before you, calm and understated. Small lights cast a warm glow across the walls. The train is not extravagant, but it is comfortable in the most reassuring way. Softly worn in places, thoughtfully arranged, designed to be lived in rather than merely passed through. Behind some doors lie other cabins, other quiet journeys beginning in parallel. Yet the space remains hushed, each sound softened by carpet and enclosed walls. You notice the faint movement of curtains near the windows, stirred perhaps by air from within the carriage. Beyond the glass, the wet platform still lingers in soft focus. But inside, all is already slightly apart from the station, as though the train has created its own pace before even leaving Vancouver behind. At the far end of the corridor, your cabin awaits. In a few moments, the public world of the station will narrow into a private corner of warm light and rain-streaked glass. Your cabin is small, but it feels complete. A large window occupies one side, already patterned with rain. Beneath it sits a compact table, simple and useful, ready to hold a drink or a book later in the evening. The seating has the deep, muted comfort of classic rail travel. Warm wood tones and brushed metal details give the room a quiet dignity. Cream bedding waits neatly arranged, promising rest once night fully settles beyond the glass. You step inside and close the door. The privacy of the space changes everything. The station, the platform, and the public beginning of the journey all fall away. What remains is a room that will move across Canada while you rest, read, look out, or sleep. For now, the train stands still. Rain continues to run softly down the window, and the city still surrounds you. Yet the room already feels like a threshold between places, Vancouver on one side and a long eastward crossing on the other. You take a little time to settle into the room. There is no hurry. A bag is placed neatly out of the way. The seat by the window becomes yours. The cabin's warm lamp brings a soft, amber glow that sits comfortably against the cool grey light outside. Every detail seems to encourage the same response. Slow down, exhale, and let the train do the work. Outside, rainwater gathers and slides across the glass in thin, winding lines. Beyond it, the platform is visible only in fragments now, part of a carriage farther away, a blurred section of wet concrete, the softened shape of the station canopy overhead. Already the outside world is becoming less distinct than the quiet room you have entered. You sit for a while by the window, listening to the gentle stillness of the carriage around you. This first pause aboard feels important. It is the small settling of body and mind before the great distance begins. For a little while, nothing changes. The train remains at the platform. The rain continues. The cabin stays warm and still. Yet that stillness does not feel empty. It feels full of gentle anticipation, like the final held note before music begins. Somewhere beyond the carriage walls, the station continues its quiet work. But inside your room, time seems to loosen and widen. You look out through the glass at the damp silver afternoon. The city has become all texture now: rain, reflections, steel, soft light. Soon it will begin slipping away, but perhaps that is why this pause feels so pleasant. For these last few minutes, you are both stationary and already in transit, held between departure and journey. The knowledge of the distance ahead begins to soothe rather than excite. You are not going anywhere in a rush. You are being carried slowly through a landscape large enough to take days to cross, and the evening ahead is only the first page. Then, almost imperceptibly, the train begins to move. There is no dramatic lurch, only the softest change beneath you, a subtle gathering of motion that travels through the carriage before becoming steady. Outside the window, the nearest platform edge starts to slide past. A post drifts by, then another. The station, which a moment ago seemed settled around you, begins gently to loosen its hold. The first movement of a sleeper train always feels different from any other kind of departure. Once the wheels begin their long, measured turning, There is no need to do anything more. You need not concentrate on the road or watch for signs or consider directions. You simply remain where you are while the country itself slowly begins to come to you. The platform slips backward into rain and shadow. Vancouver, still close, has begun to recede. The final parts of the station pass by in a quiet procession. Canopies, trackside equipment, neighboring rails, and the rear edges of buildings slide one after another beyond the rain-spotted glass. Wet steel catches the dim afternoon light. Pools of water shine between the tracks. The ordered geometry of the station begins loosening into the less formal shapes of the railway outskirts. Inside, the cabin remains reassuringly unchanged. That is part of the comfort. No matter how the view transforms, your room keeps its warm lamp, its cream bedding, and its enclosed stillness. The world moves, you remain. Soon the last sheltering structures of the station are gone, and the train enters the wider city. Warehouses and sidings appear, fences drift by, signals and distant roads come and go in the soft rain. Vancouver is still with you, but now you are passing through it rather than belonging to it. The train moves deeper into the city's outskirts. Low industrial buildings, service roads, and fenced yards pass beside the line. Beyond them, neighborhoods begin to appear. Rows of houses softened by rain, trees already touched by early autumn color, parked cars shining on wet streets. Everything outside seems quiet beneath the weather, as though the whole city has lowered its voice for the evening. The sky remains a uniform pale grey, but the rain has become finer now, sometimes almost invisible, except where it continues to bead and gather on the glass. The changing patterns on the window become part of the journey too. They soften what you see, making even the ordinary edges of the city look dreamlike and distant. You continue to watch as Vancouver slowly unthreads itself. The urban landscape does not end all at once. Instead, it gradually loosens, giving more space to trees, open ground, and the first suggestion that countryside is on its way. By degrees, the city begins giving way to something wider. The spaces between buildings lengthen, trees gather more densely. The line curves past stretches of open ground and water, and soon the landscape starts feeling less urban, more riverbound and spacious. The Fraser Valley opens around the tracks beneath the rainy sky, green and gold and silver in the late afternoon light. Here the journey begins to breathe differently. The train no longer feels as though it is merely departing Vancouver. It feels as though it is entering the country beyond it. Wet grasses bend beneath the weather. Stands of trees show patches of yellow among deeper green. Low mist hangs over distant slopes. The river, broad and calm, appears now and then beside the line before slipping away again. You remain at the window, watching the scenery slowly simplify into earth, water, and weather. Already the city feels farther away than the miles alone would suggest. As the train continues east, the first real autumn color begins to reveal itself, not in a sudden blaze, but gently, tree by tree. Among the darker evergreens, patches of yellow stand out. Here and there, a grove carries a richer gold. The color is softened by the rain and the clouded light, but perhaps that makes it even more beautiful. Nothing is sharp or showy. The season enters the journey quietly. The line runs beside water for a while, then past wooded slopes and small clearings. Everything looks freshly washed. The leaves seem heavier with rain. Trunks and branches are darkened almost to black. The whole landscape has the calm, saturated richness that belongs only to wet autumn days. It is the first hint of what will come later, farther east, when the colors deepen into orange and red. But this beginning feels exactly right. The country is introducing itself slowly, in stages, allowing the journey to unfold without haste. After a long time at the window, you let yourself simply rest within the room. The train's motion has become steady now, a gentle carrying rhythm beneath everything else. The small cabin seems even more comfortable once the journey is underway. Its warm tones feel deeper against the grayness outside. The light from the lamp falls across the table and the edge of the bedding, creating a small, sheltered world that belongs only to this evening. Through the glass, the landscape continues to pass in softened layers of rain, woodland, and river. But now you notice it less urgently. There is no need to keep watch over every mile. The view will still be there when you return your attention to it. The country will continue unfolding on its own. For a while, you simply listen. The low sound of the train beneath the floor, the faint rattle of the window, the soft, enclosed quiet of a carriage designed for long journeys and restful nights. Later, you leave the cabin for a while and make your way through the quiet carriages to the observation space. The dome car feels wonderfully open after the enclosed warmth of your room. Curving windows lift the view upward and outward, allowing more of the sky, trees, and surrounding landscape to come into sight at once. Though the afternoon remains grey, the wider perspective gives everything a greater sense of scale. The train curves ahead through wet country. Forested slopes rise nearby. The line seems to draw a patient path through the broad land beyond Vancouver. The atmosphere here is calm and hushed. A few other travelers sit quietly, watching the view in the same unspoken way. No one seems eager to interrupt the gentle spell of motion and weather. Rain traces the glass in shifting lines while the train moves steadily beneath the heavy cloud. From here, with the countryside opening around you, the journey feels suddenly larger. You are no longer just traveling from one city to another. You are crossing a continent by rail, beginning with this long, wet evening in British Columbia. By the time you return to your cabin, the afternoon has begun giving way to evening. The landscape outside is darker now, the colors of the trees have deepened into subdued bronze and olive and shadowed gold. The river, when it appears, reflects only a dim strip of the overcast sky. Distant slopes fade more quickly into mist, and the edges of the world beyond the tracks seem to soften with each passing mile. Inside, the contrast grows stronger. The lamp's amber light becomes more noticeable, the bedding looks warmer. The cabin feels more enclosed, more separate from the cooling world beyond the glass. This is one of the quiet pleasures of train travel, watching daylight withdraw while remaining in perfect comfort, carried onward through it all. The rain has almost stopped now, leaving only droplets across the window. They catch the last of the evening light and hold it for a moment before everything begins to dim further. Night is on its way, and the first evening aboard is settling beautifully into place. Now the evening is almost gone. Beyond the window, only fragments of the outside world remain visible. The dark suggestion of trees, the occasional distant light, the faintest shifting shapes where the land continues beside the line. The broader landscape has disappeared into night, but the journey has not become emptier for that. It has simply turned inward. The cabin, warm and softly lit, feels especially peaceful now. The steady movement beneath the carriage is more noticeable in the darkness, a calm, continuous rhythm carrying you east while the country sleeps outside. There is no need to know exactly where you are at this moment. Somewhere in British Columbia, the rails continue through rain-washed valleys and shadowed woodland, and the train follows them without effort. You remain by the window a little longer, watching your own room reflected faintly against the black glass. Then even that begins to soften. The first night aboard has arrived, and with it comes the quiet understanding that this journey will unfold slowly, gently, and in its own time. The train continues east through the darkness. Beyond the window, the landscape has become almost impossible to read. Every so often, the black outline of a forested slope rises against a slightly lighter sky, then disappears again as the track curves deeper into the valley. A narrow ribbon of water occasionally catches what little light remains, reflecting a dull silver shimmer before vanishing beneath the trees. Inside the cabin, nothing has changed. The lamp continues to cast its warm amber glow across the small table and cream bedding. The muted blue seat by the window remains softly shadowed. The steady rhythm beneath the floor has become so familiar now that it almost seems part of the room itself. Outside, British Columbia continues unseen. Mountains rise somewhere beyond the darkness. Rivers follow the railway through valleys you can no longer make out. Small settlements may lie beyond the trees, but from here there are only occasional distant lights and the gentle sense of being carried deeper into a vast, sleeping landscape. There is something comforting about not needing to see every mile. The train knows the way. After a long stretch of darkness, a single warm light appears beyond the trees. It is distant at first, little more than a soft point against the black landscape. Then another appears nearby. For a few moments, you catch the outline of a small building set back from the railway, perhaps a farmhouse or a quiet home beside the valley road. Its windows glow warmly against the night. The train passes without slowing. The little pool of light drifts behind the curtain edge and disappears, leaving the landscape dark once more. These brief signs of life feel strangely reassuring. Out here, where so much of the country seems hidden by forest and mountain, a handful of lights are enough to remind you that people are sleeping in houses scattered throughout the valleys while your train continues quietly past. Soon there is only darkness again. The carriage rocks gently. Rain no longer taps against the glass with the same persistence as before. Only an occasional droplet travels slowly downward, catching the cabin light for a moment before slipping out of sight. For a while, the railway begins following water again. At first, you notice only a faint, pale movement below the dark trees. Then the line curves, and the river becomes easier to see. Moonlight filters weakly through breaks in the cloud, catching the surface in broken silver patches. The water moves steadily through the valley beside you. Black forest rises from its opposite bank. Higher still, the mountains remain mostly lost against the night sky, their shapes suggested rather than clearly visible. The train follows the river for several miles. Sometimes the water is close to the tracks. Sometimes it drops farther away below the railway. Each curve changes the angle of the view, allowing the moonlit surface to appear, disappear, and return again. You remain beside the window, listening to the low rhythm of the wheels. There is no reason to hurry towards sleep. The night itself feels restful enough. Eventually, the darkness beyond the window becomes too complete to hold your attention. The lamp is lowered to a softer glow. The cabin feels smaller now, but more comforting because of it. Cream bedding waits beside you, smooth and warm beneath the subdued light. Beyond the glass, the outside world has almost disappeared completely. Only the movement remains. The gentle sway of the carriage, the muted vibration beneath the floor, the quiet metallic rhythm of wheels traveling over the rails. You settle into the bed and allow the day to loosen its grip. Vancouver feels far away now, though the journey has only just begun. Somewhere ahead lie the mountains, still hidden by the night. They will arrive without your help. There is nothing you need to stay awake for. The train continues east, and while it does, you allow your eyes to close. Morning arrives almost without announcing itself. At first, the window simply seems less black. A faint blue-gray tone appears beyond the curtains, barely strong enough to separate the glass from the darkness around it. The cabin remains dim, still held mostly in the warmth of the lamp and the lingering quiet of night. Outside, shapes begin returning one by one. The nearest trees appear first. Dark evergreens stand along the railway, softened by mist. Beyond them, something larger rises into the pale morning, though its upper edge remains hidden beneath low cloud. The mountains. You stay where you are for a moment, watching the landscape slowly rebuild itself from shadow. There is no sunrise yet, no bright color on the horizon, only a cold, calm morning, gradually revealing where the train has carried you while you slept. As the light strengthens, the mountains become unmistakable. They rise far beyond the railway, enormous and layered, their lower slopes covered in dark forest, while their upper reaches disappear into cloud. Mist hangs between the ridges, drifting slowly through the valley as though the morning has only just begun to wake. The rain has eased to a fine haze. Water still beads across the window, but the landscape beyond is clearer now. Yellow trees appear among the evergreens, scattered through the valley in small, bright patches. Their autumn color looks almost luminous against the damp greens and grays surrounding them. The train moves steadily along the river. The water beside the tracks is broad and cold-looking, reflecting the pale morning sky. After the darkness of the night, the scale of everything feels remarkable. You went to sleep inside a small, warm cabin. You have woken inside the mountains. The railway bends deeper into the mountains. Cloud sits low across the valley, wrapping itself around the slopes in long, pale bands. Some ridges are visible only halfway up. Others appear briefly through the mist before disappearing again. The changing view makes the mountains feel almost endless. One slope passes, another rises behind it, then another farther still. Along the lower ground, the forest remains dense and wet. Evergreens dominate the valley, but autumn continues threading itself quietly among them. Golden trees gather near streams and open ground. Fallen leaves cling to dark rocks beside the railway. The train follows another broad curve. For a few seconds, the valley opens widely enough to show several ridges at once, each one softer and paler than the last. You watch until the forest closes around the view again. The river returns close beside the tracks. Morning light has strengthened enough now to reveal its color properly, a cold gray-green softened by the overcast sky. The current moves quickly around exposed stones and along low gravel banks. On the far side, forest climbs steeply towards the mountains. The trees nearest the water carry some of the strongest autumn color you've seen so far. Yellow leaves gather in narrow bands between the river and the darker evergreens above, brightening the valley without overwhelming it. Occasionally, the railway rises slightly above the water. From here you can see farther upstream, where the river bends between mist-covered slopes and disappears into the distance. The cabin window frames the whole scene like a moving picture. Nothing stays perfectly arranged for long. The train carries each view away and replaces it with another. Later in the morning, you leave the cabin and make your way through the train. The corridors feel different in daylight. The windows now hold mountains instead of darkness. Forest and river move past in long, quiet stretches, while the carriage rocks gently beneath you. The dining space is warm and understated. Large windows bring the pale mountain morning inside, while soft lighting keeps the room comfortable against the grey weather beyond. Breakfast arrives simply, something warm to begin the day while the train continues moving through the valley. Outside, the landscape refuses to stay still. A river appears beside the railway, then forest, then an opening between the trees reveals another huge mountain wall rising into cloud. There is something deeply pleasant about eating while the view continues changing without interruption. No destination needs your attention yet. For now, breakfast and the moving mountains are enough. When you return to the cabin, the valley seems broader than before. The morning has lifted slightly, though the sky remains overcast. Mist still clings to the highest slopes, but the lower mountains stand clear enough to show dark bands of rock between the trees. You settle once more beside the window. The familiar room feels different in daylight. The blue seat has regained its color. The warm wood catches the pale natural light. The lamp is no longer necessary, though its glow remains softly present against the grey world outside. Beyond the glass, autumn woodland follows the river. Golden trees grow more frequent now, especially along the lower slopes and watercourses. Their color moves past in quiet flashes between the darker evergreens. The journey feels established. You have slept here, woken here, eaten breakfast while the mountains passed outside. The train no longer feels temporary. For a little while, it feels like home. Gradually, the valley begins to tighten around the railway. The mountains stand closer now. Their lower slopes rise sharply from the river, covered in dark conifers and streaked with exposed stone. Small waterfalls appear where rainwater has gathered high above, dropping in thin white lines down the distant rock. The train follows the shape of the valley carefully. Straight sections become shorter, curves arrive more often. Sometimes the river vanishes behind trees or below the railway embankment, only to return a few minutes later on the opposite side. The sense of entering the Rockies grows stronger with every mile. These are no longer distant mountains decorating the horizon. They surround the railway completely. Even through the rain-softened glass, their scale is difficult to judge. You have the strange feeling that the train has become very small within the landscape. The peaks ahead rise higher still. For the first time, small traces of white appear near their upper ridges. Not winter snow covering the mountains, only the faint remnants of colder weather lingering high above the valley. A narrow, pale line rests along one distant shoulder. Another patch clings beneath a rocky summit where the cloud briefly lifts. Down here, autumn remains firmly in control. The forest is wet and dark. Yellow leaves brighten the lower slopes. The river continues between gravel banks below, but far above, those first touches of snow hint at a colder world occupying the heights. The contrast is beautiful. Autumn in the valley, the first suggestion of winter above it. The train continues beneath both. For several miles, the landscape opens unexpectedly. The railway leaves the tighter walls of the valley and enters a broad mountain basin. River channels spread across the lower ground between pale gravel bars. Forest stands farther back from the tracks, giving the mountains enough distance to reveal their full shape. For the first time this morning, several major peaks are visible at once. Their slopes rise in layers, dark forest giving way to exposed grey rock, then disappearing beneath long bands of cloud. Pale snow remains high on a few distant ridges. The autumn trees look small from here. Golden patches gather along the riverbanks and across the lower valley floor, tiny against the scale of the mountains behind them. The train crosses the open landscape slowly enough for the view to remain with you. This is the Canada you imagined before boarding, only quieter, larger, and far more beautiful in the rain. Then a mountain fills almost the entire window. It rises sharply from the opposite side of the valley, its lower forest disappearing into a huge wall of rock above. Long vertical lines run through the grey stone. Cloud hangs around the summit, hiding whatever lies beyond. For several minutes, the train travels directly beneath it. The scale is extraordinary. From the cabin, you can see individual trees along the lower slope, then watch them become smaller and smaller until the upper mountain seems almost bare. Water runs down several channels in the rock, bright against the darker surface. The railway curves slightly. The mountain shifts across the window but never seems to grow smaller. Only when the valley widens again does the full scale become clear. Another peak waits behind it, and another behind that. The morning settles into a long procession of mountains, forest, and water. Autumn colors appear more frequently now. Golden trees line sections of the river and gather across open slopes, sometimes forming broad patches between the darker conifers. The colors remain softened by cloud and moisture, never unnaturally bright, but against the grey mountains, they seem especially rich. The river changes character as the valley changes. At times it widens into calm stretches of water. Elsewhere, it narrows around exposed stones and bends beneath forested banks. Every few minutes, another mountain enters the view. Some are rounded and heavily wooded, others rise sharply into broken rock. A few hold faint streaks of snow close to their summits. You could watch this landscape for hours without needing anything else to happen. And perhaps that is exactly what the journey is for. The river beside the railway grows broader again. Its surface reflects the pale sky in long silver-grey stretches, broken occasionally by gravel islands and shallow channels near the bank. Forest follows the water closely, dark green mixed with yellow and gold. The mountains no longer feel like occasional landmarks. They occupy every direction. Ahead, behind, and across the river, ridges overlap one another until the valley seems completely enclosed by stone and forest. Low cloud moves between them. Sometimes a summit appears for only a minute before mist covers it again. The train continues beside the water at the same calm pace. There is no dramatic arrival into the Rockies, only the gradual realization that you are fully within them now. And somewhere farther along this river valley, Jasper is waiting. Small signs of settlement begin appearing between the trees. A service road follows the railway for a while. A few low buildings appear in the distance. Additional tracks begin running alongside your own, shining darkly from the morning rain. After so many miles of mountain wilderness, even these modest changes feel noticeable. The landscape remains spectacular. Peaks still rise beyond the forest in every direction, but the valley floor now carries the subtle order of a railway town. Sidings, equipment, small structures and parallel rails gradually gathering around the main line. The train begins to slow. Its rhythm changes almost imperceptibly beneath you. Outside, the mountains seem strangely still, while everything closer to the tracks passes more slowly. Jasper is near. At last, the train glides into Jasper. The platform appears beside the window, wet from the morning weather and shining beneath the soft grey sky. The train slows further, then finally comes to rest. After so many hours of continuous motion, the stillness is immediately noticeable. Outside, the station sits quietly beneath the mountains. Low buildings and railway structures occupy the foreground, modest against the vast landscape surrounding them. Beyond the platform, forest rises towards slopes that disappear into cloud. Nothing about the stop feels hurried. The train seems content simply to wait here for a while. Inside the cabin, the familiar lamp and warm wood remain unchanged, but without the motion beneath you, the room feels subtly different. For the first time since Vancouver, the rails are still. For a little while, nothing moves. The rain has almost stopped. Moisture remains across the platform, and on the silver sides of the train, catching the soft morning light in small reflections. Beyond the railway, the mountains stand quietly around Jasper, their upper slopes still folded into cloud. The stop gives you time to notice details that movement usually carries away too quickly. Water dripping from the edge of the platform shelter, dark rails disappearing beneath the carriages, golden trees beyond the station, mist shifting slowly along the lower mountains. The train feels unusually peaceful while resting here, a long silver line held briefly between Vancouver and everything still waiting to the east. There is no need for anything dramatic to happen. The pause itself is enough. Soon the train will move again, but not quite yet. Then the familiar movement returns. At first, the platform begins drifting slowly past the window. The shelter slides away. Additional tracks move alongside you. The station buildings gradually fall behind. Within a few minutes, Jasper begins disappearing among the trees. The mountains, however, remain. They continue rising on both sides of the valley, as though the town had been only a brief clearing within something much larger. The train gathers its steady rhythm once more. Outside, golden autumn trees pass close beside the line. Beyond them, dark conifers climb the lower slopes. Cloud moves across the ridges above. You watch Jasper recede until the last railway structures vanish around a curve. Ahead lies another long stretch of mountains, and beyond those mountains eventually, the wide open country of Alberta. For now though, the Rockies still surround you completely. Beyond Jasper, the railway settles once more into the mountain valley. For a while, very little seems to have changed. Dark conifers still cover the lower slopes. Golden autumn trees continue appearing in small groups beside the tracks and along the river. Cloud remains wrapped around the higher ridges, sometimes hiding entire summits behind soft grey layers. The station is already gone. Only the mountains remain. The train follows a gentle curve away from the town, and within minutes, the railway feels remote again. Wet rocks appear beside the line. Forest presses closer. The last signs of Jasper disappear completely behind the trees. From the cabin, it is difficult to imagine that a town lies only a short distance behind you. The landscape closes around the railway as though nothing had interrupted it. The train resumes its calm rhythm. Water continues to bead across the window. Outside, the Rockies carry you onward. The river soon appears beside the railway again. It runs broad and pale beneath a clouded sky, its surface broken by exposed stones and narrow gravel bars. The water has the same cold grey-green color you have come to associate with the mountains. For several miles, the railway remains close beside it. Sometimes the river lies almost level with the train. Elsewhere, the tracks climb slightly above the bank, giving you a wider view across the water towards the forested slopes beyond. Golden trees gather along the quieter edges of the river. Behind them, the darker evergreens rise almost uninterrupted towards the mountains. The valley still feels enclosed, but there is something subtly different now. The slopes seem a little farther apart. The river has more room. The mountains remain enormous, yet the landscape has begun to breathe more openly around them. For a while longer, the highest ridges continue to dominate the view. Rocky summits rise through the cloud, their upper edges pale with the same faint traces of snow you first noticed earlier in the morning. The white remains limited to the coldest heights, little more than narrow streaks and isolated patches against the grey stone. Below, autumn continues uninterrupted. Yellow trees brighten the lower valley. Dark forest follows the water. Wet grasses cover open ground between the river and the railway. The contrast remains beautiful, but the mountains themselves are beginning to change. The steepest peaks now appear farther away. The valley floor grows wider. More sky becomes visible between the ridges. You watch the last truly towering walls of rock drift slowly behind the train. They do not disappear all at once. They simply begin to retreat. Then the change becomes unmistakable. The mountains no longer rise immediately from the railway. Open ground appears between the tracks and the distant slopes. The river wanders farther from the line, leaving broad stretches of grassland and low woodland behind. For the first time since waking, the horizon begins to feel wider than the valley itself. The mountains are still present, but now they stand back. Their shapes remain visible beneath the cloud, softer with distance and less imposing than before. The train continues steadily east. Golden trees grow in scattered groups across the open land. Low shrubs and grasses move gently beneath the damp air. There is no single moment when the Rockies end. Instead, they begin dissolving gradually into something larger and flatter. You watch the transformation happen mile by mile. The landscape settles into the foothills. Low wooded ridges replace the towering peaks. Forests remain, but they are broken now by wider clearings, meadows, and long stretches of open ground. The autumn color becomes easier to notice because there is more space around it. Yellow trees stand beside small streams. Darker conifers gather on the higher ground. The railway follows a gentle descent through the changing country. From time to time, you look back towards the mountains. They remain visible through breaks in the cloud, but each time they seem slightly farther away. Their outlines soften. Their height feels less immediate. The train carries you onward without ceremony. Behind you lies the heart of the Rockies. Ahead, Alberta begins opening towards an entirely different scale of landscape. By late morning, the railway enters a broader world. Fields begin appearing between stretches of forest. Long fences follow the land. A narrow road occasionally runs parallel to the tracks before bending away towards isolated buildings in the distance. The mountains have not vanished completely. Their faint shapes remain far behind, just visible beneath the cloud when the land opens in the right direction. But ahead, the horizon is becoming almost level. The train moves through damp autumn countryside beneath a pale sky. Patches of yellow woodland sit between fields of muted green and brown. Farm buildings appear occasionally, small against the scale of the land. Everything feels quieter now, less dramatic than the Rockies, but also calmer. The journey is entering another kind of beauty. The railway passes through increasingly settled country. Farmhouses appear more often now, usually set well back from the tracks behind sheltering rows of trees. Barns and low outbuildings stand beside open fields darkened by the recent rain. The train passes each one quickly. A gravel driveway, a few fenced paddocks, a line of yellow trees, then open country again. There is something soothing about these brief glimpses of ordinary life. After the immense scale of the mountains, the farms feel small and grounded. Smoke rises faintly from one distant chimney and disappears into the grey sky. A narrow road runs beside the railway for several minutes before turning towards another cluster of buildings. The landscape no longer feels remote, but it still feels wonderfully spacious. By afternoon, signs of a larger city begin appearing gradually. Power lines follow the railway. Roads become wider. Warehouses and industrial buildings interrupt the open fields, appearing first as isolated structures and then in longer stretches. Additional tracks begin running beside your own. Freight cars stand quietly in sidings. The distant horizon is still broad, but the railway itself has become busier. You remain beside the window as the countryside slowly gathers into the outskirts of Edmonton. The change happens gently. One industrial yard, then another. A road bridge crossing above the tracks. Rows of houses appearing beyond the warehouses. The mountains are gone now. In their place is the familiar pattern of a city approaching through its railway edge. The train slows once again. Railway yards spread beside the carriage, filled with parallel tracks and stationary freight cars. Beyond them, the city extends beneath the clouded afternoon. This stop feels different from Jasper. There are no mountains surrounding the railway now, no steep valley walls. Instead, there is space. Roads, warehouses, distant buildings and a broad sky occupy the landscape around the train. The platform arrives quietly beside the window. The motion beneath you fades, and once again, the train comes to rest. For a few minutes, you remain in the cabin and watch the station surroundings through the damp glass. It is another pause within the long crossing. Vancouver is far behind. Toronto remains very far ahead, and somewhere between them, the train has stopped here in Edmonton before continuing east. The pause is brief. Soon the carriage gives the familiar gentle pull and the platform begins moving backwards beyond the glass. Edmonton slips away in stages. First the station, then the sidings, then warehouses and roads. The city becomes lower and more scattered as the railway continues east. Residential neighborhoods appear briefly between stands of trees. Industrial buildings thin. Open ground begins returning. Within surprisingly little time, the horizon widens again. The train has left the mountains behind. Now it begins leaving the city behind too. Ahead lies a landscape unlike anything you have passed through so far. The prairies. The land opens almost completely. Fields stretch farther than you can easily judge. The railway runs through them in a long, straight line, with little to interrupt the view except occasional trees, fences, and distant farm buildings. The sky feels enormous. After so many hours surrounded by mountains, the absence of anything blocking the horizon is almost startling. Cloud extends from one side of the world to the other. Beneath it, autumn fields lie in muted shades of gold, brown, and green. The train moves steadily across the flat country. Here, distance is measured differently. A farm building can remain visible for several minutes. A line of trees seems to approach almost impossibly slowly. The landscape appears simple at first, but the longer you watch, the more peaceful that simplicity becomes. For mile after mile, the railway seems almost perfectly straight. The view ahead changes slowly. Fields pass beside the window in long horizontal bands. Stubble left after harvest gives some areas a warm golden tone. Other fields remain dark from the rain. Occasional lines of trees mark roads or property boundaries. Otherwise, the horizon stays open. The train's movement feels especially smooth here. Without tight mountain curves, the carriage settles into a steady forward rhythm. You become aware again of the small sounds inside the cabin, the faint movement of the window, the quiet vibration beneath the table, the regular turning of wheels beneath the floor. Outside, there is nothing hurried, only land, sky, railway, and an enormous distance still waiting ahead. Eventually, a small town gathers beside the railway. It begins with a few houses, then a road crossing. Low commercial buildings appear beyond the tracks, followed by a cluster of trees and a small grid of quiet streets. Nothing rises very high. The sky remains the largest thing in sight. The train passes through without stopping. For a few minutes you see back gardens, parked vehicles, wet pavements, and modest homes standing beneath autumn trees. Then the buildings begin thinning again. The final houses disappear. Open fields return almost immediately. From the train, the town feels like a small island of life surrounded by an ocean of land. Soon, even its trees have vanished behind you. A tall structure appears far ahead beside the railway. At first, it is only a narrow shape against the sky. As the train approaches, it becomes clearer. A grain elevator standing beside a small collection of railway sidings and agricultural buildings. It rises far above everything surrounding it. Across such level country, even a simple structure becomes a landmark. The train draws closer. Weathered walls catch the soft afternoon light. Rail cars sit quietly on a nearby siding. Beyond them, fields continue uninterrupted towards the horizon. For a few moments, the grain elevator dominates the view. Then the train passes it. The structure moves slowly behind you and begins shrinking again across the empty land. Before long, it is only another distant shape beneath the enormous sky. Later, a narrow country road approaches the tracks. It runs straight across the fields from one horizon to the other, darkened by the earlier rain and almost completely empty. The train reaches the crossing. For a brief moment, road and railway meet. Then the road slips beneath the window and continues away across the other side of the land. There are no houses nearby, no town, only fields, low drainage ditches, occasional fence lines, and a handful of trees standing far apart. The crossing disappears behind you almost immediately. Yet somehow, the simplicity of it stays with you. A railway traveling east, a road traveling north and south, two long lines meeting for only a few seconds in the middle of the prairies, then separating again. As the afternoon grows older, the light begins to change. For the first time all day, the cloud cover starts breaking apart. Pale brightness spreads near the western horizon behind the train, filtering through gaps in the grey and touching the fields with warmer color. The effect is subtle at first. Wet grasses catch a little gold. Harvested fields brighten. The edges of distant trees seem warmer against the sky. Inside the cabin, the light changes too. The natural glow from the window begins mixing with the softer warmth of the lamp, creating a gentle amber tone across the wood and bedding. Outside, the prairies continue without end, but under this new light, the same open landscape feels transformed. Evening is approaching. Then, almost unexpectedly, the western sky opens. Clouds lift just enough for the low sun to reach beneath them. Warm light spills across the land. The fields turn deep gold. Pools of rainwater catch bright reflections. Long shadows stretch from fences, trees, and distant farm buildings. Above, the sky remains layered with grey cloud, but near the horizon, a broad band of amber light burns softly across the evening. Nothing about the sunset feels harsh. The colors remain muted by moisture in the air, softened rather than brilliant. That makes it more beautiful. The train continues east while the light behind you spreads across the prairies. For a few quiet minutes, the entire landscape seems made of gold and shadow. You leave the cabin once more and return to the dome car. The difference is immediate. From beneath the curved glass, the prairie sky seems even larger than before. The horizon stretches almost uninterrupted in every direction. Behind the train, the sunset fills the western sky with deep amber and muted orange beneath long grey clouds. Ahead, the eastern landscape has already begun cooling towards blue. The train itself curves only slightly across the open ground. From here, you can see several carriages ahead, their silver roofs catching the last warm light. The fields on either side continue almost endlessly. No mountains interrupt the view now. No valley contains it. Only the vast evening sky and the railway crossing beneath it. You sit quietly and watch daylight spread itself across the prairies one final time. The train feels quieter as you make your way back through the carriages. Warm ceiling lights run along the corridor, reflecting softly from polished wood and metal. Outside the windows, the final colors of sunset are fading. Fields become darker. Farm buildings turn into silhouettes. The horizon still holds a narrow band of amber, but above it, the sky is already becoming blue-gray. You move slowly through the carriage. After the enormous openness of the dome car, the enclosed corridor feels especially warm and sheltered. Cabin doors line one side. Curtains hang beside the windows. The steady movement beneath the floor follows you all the way back. By the time you reach your room, most of the daylight has gone. By the time you settle back into the cabin, night has almost completely arrived. The great openness of the prairies is still there beyond the window. You simply cannot see most of it anymore. The fields have become a single dark expanse. Occasionally, the lights of a distant farmhouse appear far across the land. A road crossing flashes briefly into view. Somewhere farther away, the faint glow of a small town rests against the horizon. Inside, the cabin has returned to its nighttime character. The amber lamp warms the wood. The cream bedding catches its soft light. The blue seat disappears gradually into shadow. You sit beside the window and listen to the steady railway rhythm beneath you. The mountains feel impossibly far behind now. Outside lies an enormous darkness stretching across the prairies, and through the middle of it, the train continues east. The hours pass quietly. Outside, the prairies remain almost completely hidden. The enormous landscape you watched beneath the sunset has become a dark, level emptiness beyond the window. Every so often, a distant cluster of lights appears far across the fields, remains visible for a minute or two, then slowly slips behind. The distances are difficult to judge at night. A farmhouse light might be a mile away. A small town could be much farther. Against such flat country, even the faintest glow seems able to travel endlessly through the darkness. Inside the cabin, the lamp remains warm and steady. The green bedding catches its soft light. The table beneath the window is empty now. There is nothing left to do except listen to the rhythm of the train and allow the long journey to continue around you. Somewhere beyond the glass, Alberta is gradually giving way to Saskatchewan. But in the darkness, there is no border to see, only the rails continuing east. Later, more lights begin gathering beside the railway. At first, there are only a few. Then a row of dim street lamps appears beyond the tracks. Small houses pass through the darkness, their windows glowing softly behind trees and fences. The train does not stop. It moves quietly through the sleeping prairie town, while almost everything beyond the glass remains still. A road crossing flashes briefly beneath artificial light. A small cluster of low buildings follows, then the houses begin thinning again. Within minutes, the darkness returns. From the cabin, the little town feels almost dreamlike, a brief collection of lights in an otherwise enormous night. You never learn its name. You do not need to. For a few moments, it simply becomes part of the journey. Then the prairies take over again. Eventually, even the scattered lights become less frequent. The cabin grows quieter. The lamp is lowered again until only a subdued amber glow remains across the bedding and wood. Outside, the window is almost completely black. The movement of the train becomes the strongest part of the night, a steady vibration beneath the bed, the low metallic rhythm of the rails, the occasional gentle sway of the carriage as the railway changes direction almost too gradually to notice. You settle into the bed. The day behind you feels extraordinarily long now. Mountains in the morning, Edmonton in the afternoon, sunset across the prairies, and now this wide, unseen darkness carrying you farther east. You close your eyes. The train continues without needing anything from you. When you wake again, the cabin is still dark. For a moment, it feels as though no time has passed. Then you notice the window. It is no longer completely black. A faint blue-gray line rests along the horizon, separating the land from the sky. The prairies are beginning to return. There are no mountains now, no ridges. Nothing rises high enough to interrupt the first weak light. The land appears as a single dark strip beneath an enormous pre-dawn sky. Occasionally, the outline of a tree or farm building becomes visible against the horizon. Inside, the lamp still feels necessary. Its warmth belongs to the night. But beyond the glass, morning has already begun. The light gathers quickly across the open land. Because there are no mountains to block the horizon, dawn seems to spread everywhere at once. The eastern sky becomes pale silver blue. Fields slowly regain their color beneath it. Dark brown earth, muted gold stubble. Thin strips of wet grass beside the railway. Pools left by yesterday's rain reflect the growing light in narrow flashes. The landscape feels extraordinarily exposed. Nothing hides the horizon. Nothing contains the sky. The train travels through the middle of it all, steady and small beneath the enormous morning. Far away, a line of trees marks a road or farm boundary. Beyond that, another field begins, then another. Morning has returned to the prairies. As morning brightens, the prairie gains more color. The gold of the harvested fields becomes warmer. Small stands of trees appear in shades of yellow and soft orange. Farm roads cross the landscape in long, straight lines. The rain has stopped now, though moisture still clings to the window and lies across the ground outside. You remain beside the glass for a while. The simplicity of the view has become familiar. At first, the flatness seemed almost empty after the Rockies. Now it feels spacious rather than bare. Details reveal themselves slowly. A distant barn, a water tower far on the horizon, a group of trees sheltering a farmhouse. Nothing appears suddenly. Across the prairies, everything seems to approach at its own unhurried pace. Gradually, the railway becomes busier again. Additional tracks appear alongside the train. Freight cars stand in long rows across nearby sidings. Industrial buildings begin interrupting the fields, first occasionally, then more often. Roads approach from the distance. Low neighborhoods gather beyond them. After hours of uninterrupted prairie, the change feels significant. The train begins slowing. Outside, the city remains low beneath the huge Saskatchewan sky. There are no mountains behind it. Nothing closes the view. Saskatoon seems simply to have grown from the open land itself. The railway yards widen, more tracks converge, and the calm rhythm beneath the carriage softens as another stop approaches. The train comes quietly to rest. Beyond the window, the surroundings feel distinctly urban now, though the horizon remains wide and open. Wet railway tracks lie beside low buildings and service areas. Roads pass farther beyond. Autumn trees soften the edges of the city with yellow leaves. Compared with Jasper, the stop feels almost exposed beneath the sky. There are no mountains holding the station in place, only land spreading outward in every direction. For a little while, the familiar motion of the train disappears. You remain inside the cabin, looking through the rain-speckled glass at another point on the long route east. Vancouver now feels very distant. Even the Rockies seem almost unreal. Here, everything belongs to the prairies. After the stop, you make your way towards the dining car. Morning light fills the train differently here. There are no mountain walls outside the windows. Instead, the view stretches far into the distance, giving the dining space an openness of its own. Breakfast arrives while Saskatchewan continues slipping past. A warm drink, a simple plate of food. Beyond the glass, fields unfold beneath the grey sky. Farmhouses appear occasionally among yellow trees. Roads run straight towards the horizon. The scenery changes slowly enough that you can watch the same distant grain structure or tree line for several minutes. There is no dramatic landmark to hold your attention, and somehow that makes breakfast even more peaceful. The landscape simply remains with you. Back in the cabin, the city has already disappeared. Open fields surround the railway once more. The transition happens with surprising speed. One moment, there are warehouses and roads, then scattered houses, then almost nothing. The railway returns to its long, straight course across the land. Harvested fields lie beneath a brighter sky now, separated by thin drainage channels and narrow roads. Small groups of trees gather around distant farms. Their leaves are richer than yesterday, carrying more yellow and touches of orange. The train continues east with the same smooth rhythm. Another city has come and gone. The prairies remain. Later, shallow wetlands begin appearing between the fields. Small ponds reflect the pale sky. Reeds and long grasses gather around their edges, yellowed by the season. The land remains flat, but these stretches of water give it new texture. Some lie close beside the railway, others sit far across the fields, like pieces of dull silver laid against the earth. Tree lines become slightly more frequent, too. Clusters of yellow leaves gather around streams and low ground where moisture lingers. The morning remains cool and calm. Cloud still covers much of the sky. Every so often, a brighter patch passes over the land and briefly lifts the color from the fields. Then the gray returns. Another grain elevator appears in the distance. This one stands beside a smaller settlement, accompanied by a few low buildings and several railway sidings. Across the open land, you can see it long before the train reaches it. The structure grows slowly against the horizon. Fields remain on every side. A narrow road approaches the settlement from the south, disappearing between a few houses and trees. The train passes without stopping. For a brief moment, the elevator and the little town occupy the whole view. Then they begin shrinking behind you. The repetition feels comforting now. Fields, tracks, small settlements, then open land again. These quiet landmarks give rhythm to the immense distances of the prairies. By early afternoon, the landscape begins changing almost imperceptibly. The fields remain broad, the horizon is still distant, but trees appear more frequently than before. Long shelter belts become small wooded areas. Streams carry lines of yellow foliage across the land. The open spaces between farms begin feeling slightly shorter. Nothing has become forested yet. This is still unmistakably prairie, but the emptiness is softening. The autumn color grows richer too. Yellow remains dominant, but warmer orange begins appearing in isolated trees along the watercourses. You watch the change unfold slowly enough that it is difficult to say when it began. The country simply seems a little less open than it did an hour ago. Somewhere along this long stretch of railway, Saskatchewan gives way to Manitoba. There is no dramatic border, no sudden change beneath the wheels. The fields simply continue. Yet little by little, the country seems greener and more broken by trees. Small rivers wind through low ground. Woodland gathers more densely around farms. Autumn foliage stands brighter beside the darker fields, especially where the land dips towards water. The train continues beneath a layered grey sky. Rain begins lightly again, not enough to hide the landscape, only enough to leave fresh droplets on the window and deepen the color outside. Another province has begun almost without announcement. The rain settles into a gentle afternoon shower. Fields darken beneath it, roads become glossy. Trees beside the railway carry deeper color against the grey sky. The train passes farms surrounded by thicker shelter belts now. Small ponds gather beside the fields. Drainage channels shine with reflected cloud. There is still plenty of open land, but the landscape no longer feels endless in quite the same way. Woodland interrupts the horizon more often. Groups of trees appear close beside the tracks. For a few seconds at a time, they fill the whole window before opening again onto another broad field. The shift towards eastern Canada is beginning, slowly, almost quietly enough to miss. The land becomes remarkably level again. Fields spread wide across the Red River Plain, divided into long geometric strips. The horizon opens, but unlike the emptier Saskatchewan landscape, signs of settlement are more frequent here. Farmhouses appear at shorter intervals. Roads cross the railway more often. Rows of trees follow drainage channels and property lines. The rain begins easing. Cloud still hangs low, but the western edge of the sky grows slightly brighter behind the train. Ahead, the afternoon remains cool and grey. Winnipeg is somewhere beyond the horizon now. The railway points towards it in an almost perfect line. The countryside begins gathering into a city once again. Roads widen, power lines appear, industrial yards sit beside the railway. Freight tracks multiply until several lines run parallel with your own. Long rows of rail cars stand motionless beneath the grey sky. Beyond them, buildings become more numerous. Warehouses, residential blocks, road bridges. The transformation feels gradual but unmistakable. After so many hours of fields and small towns, Winnipeg seems enormous. The train begins slowing as the railway corridor grows busier. Outside, wet tracks catch the pale afternoon light. Autumn trees appear between buildings in patches of yellow and orange. The prairies have carried you to another major stop. The train finally slows to a stop. After another long day of constant movement, the stillness is noticeable immediately. Outside, Winnipeg surrounds the railway. Wet platforms and tracks stretch beneath the afternoon sky. Buildings rise beyond the station area, more substantial than the small prairie towns you've passed throughout the day. Traffic moves in the distance. Autumn trees stand between streets and railway structures. Inside the cabin, everything remains unchanged. The same blue seat, the same cream bedding, the same table beneath the window. Yet the journey outside has transformed completely since morning. You woke beneath an open Saskatchewan sky. Now you're stationary in the heart of Manitoba's largest city, and the crossing is still far from finished. The train remains still for a while. Without the steady vibration beneath the floor, the cabin feels almost unusually quiet. Outside, the city continues around you. A service vehicle moves far beyond the platform. Water drips from the edge of a shelter. Wet rails reflect small pieces of the sky. The afternoon light is beginning to fade now, though night is still some distance away. For a few minutes, you simply watch. This stop marks another quiet threshold in the journey. Behind you lie the Rockies and the enormous western prairies. Ahead, the geography of Canada will begin changing again. The fields will not last forever. Beyond Winnipeg, lakes, rock, and forest are waiting. For now, however, there is only this still moment between landscapes. Then the train begins moving again. The platform slides slowly past. Tracks gather and separate beyond the window. Station structures disappear behind neighboring buildings. Winnipeg recedes gradually rather than all at once. For several miles, the railway remains surrounded by the city. Warehouses pass. Roads cross above the tracks. Neighborhoods appear between autumn trees. Then the buildings begin thinning. Open ground returns, but the landscape ahead feels different from the prairies you have crossed all day. Trees gather more densely along the horizon. Low woodland appears in broader stretches. Pools of water reflect the darkening sky. The train continues east. Behind you lies the immense open center of Canada. Ahead, the country is preparing to close around the railway again. Winnipeg continues fading behind the train. For a while, the landscape still carries traces of the flat country you have crossed all day. Open fields remain beside the railway. Drainage channels reflect the darkening sky. Farm buildings appear occasionally between lines of autumn trees, but the spaces between them are shrinking. Woodland gathers more frequently now. Groups of spruce and pine begin mixing with the yellow deciduous trees. Low patches of exposed stone appear beside the tracks, small at first, almost easy to overlook. The railway begins curving more often too. After so many miles of straight prairie track, even these gentle bends feel noticeable. Outside, evening continues to deepen. The last open fields become fragmented between trees and wet ground. Behind you lies the vast central plain. Ahead, another Canada is beginning. Soon the change becomes impossible to miss. The railway passes between low walls of exposed rock. Grey stone rises beside the tracks, darkened by rain and broken by narrow cracks where small evergreens have taken root. Beyond it, the forest is thicker. Pine and spruce stand among birch and aspen carrying yellow leaves, while occasional orange branches brighten the darker woodland. Then water appears. A small lake lies between the trees, its surface perfectly calm beneath the cloud. For a few seconds, you see the whole of it. Rocky shoreline, dark forest, a faint reflection of the evening sky. Then the railway bends behind another granite cutting, and the lake disappears. This is the Canadian Shield. The flat prairies are finally behind you. Water begins appearing everywhere. Sometimes it is only a narrow pond between the trees. Sometimes the forest opens suddenly onto a lake large enough that the opposite shore seems distant beneath the evening haze. The railway threads between them, rock, forest, water, then rock again. The landscape feels more enclosed than the prairies, but never cramped. Every bend seems to reveal another hidden piece of country. A still inlet beneath yellow birches, a rocky island carrying 3 dark pines, a broad lake reflecting the last pale light from the sky. The autumn colors are richer here too. Gold still dominates, but touches of orange and muted red begin appearing among the trees. You remain beside the window. There is far too much to see to look away yet. Dusk settles quickly beneath the forest. The lakes remain visible longer than the land around them, holding pale fragments of sky across their darkening surfaces. The trees become deeper silhouettes. Granite cuttings beside the railway lose their detail. Occasionally, a yellow tree close to the line catches enough remaining light to glow briefly against the dark of forest before disappearing behind the carriage. Inside, the cabin grows warmer by contrast. The amber lamp reflects softly across the wood. The cream bedding takes on the same gentle color. Outside, blue-gray evening gathers between the rocks and pines. You have traveled through two entirely different landscapes today. The open prairies now seem very far away. Here, everything has become forest, stone, and water. Eventually, the landscape disappears almost completely. Only fragments remain. A dark line of trees, a brief silver reflection where the train passes close to water. The pale face of exposed rock illuminated for a moment before falling back into darkness. There are fewer distant lights here than there were on the prairies. The country feels more remote. For long stretches, nothing beyond the window suggests another road, house, or settlement exists anywhere nearby. The railway simply continues through the forest. Inside, however, the familiar room remains unchanged. The same lamp, the same bed, the same quiet table beneath the glass. Once again, the cabin becomes a tiny, warm place, moving through an enormous, unseen landscape. Later, you prepare to sleep once more. By now, the routine feels familiar. The lamp is lowered. The cabin settles into darkness around its edges. Beyond the window, almost nothing can be seen. The sound of the train becomes more noticeable instead. The soft rhythm of the wheels, a gentle sway through another long curve. The slightly different resonance when the railway passes between walls of rock. You settle beneath the cream bedding. Vancouver feels almost impossibly distant now. So do the Rockies. Even the prairies belong to another day. Somewhere outside, lakes and forests continue for hundreds of miles across northern Ontario. You do not need to see them tonight. Morning will return soon enough. Morning begins with water. When you wake, the window is filled by the dark surface of a lake. It stretches beyond the railway beneath a pale blue-grey sky, almost perfectly still, except for slight ripples near the rocky shore. The forest on the opposite bank is only beginning to regain its color. Dark pines stand among softer shapes of yellow and orange. Mist hangs close to the water. Nearby granite remains nearly black from the night and yesterday's rain. The cabin is still dim enough for the lamp to remain useful. Outside, however, another day is beginning. You lie quietly for a moment and watch the lake move slowly past. It feels very different from waking on the prairies. There is no distant horizon now, only water, rock, and forest. As the morning brightens, the colors outside become extraordinary. The restrained autumn of the west has deepened here. Whole sections of forest glow gold. Orange trees gather across rocky slopes. Among them, occasional maples carry darker red leaves that stand out sharply against the surrounding pines. The color never completely overwhelms the landscape. Dark conifers remain everywhere, holding the brighter trees between them. The railway curves along the edge of another lake. Small rocky islands rise from the water, each carrying a handful of autumn trees. Beyond them, forest continues towards a low, distant ridge. There is no single grand mountain or landmark to dominate the view. Instead, beauty seems to exist everywhere at once. The railway turns away from the water and enters a series of rock cuttings. Granite rises close beside the train. Its surface is rough and broken, streaked with moisture and patches of moss. Small trees grow impossibly from cracks in the stone. For a few seconds, the view beyond the window becomes almost entirely rock. Then the cutting opens. Forest returns. Another lake flashes between the trees. A second wall of granite appears ahead. The railway has been shaped directly through the shield here, bending around some ridges and cutting through others. After the immense straight tracks of the prairies, the constant curves feel almost playful. The landscape seems to be guiding the railway now. Later, you return to the dining car. Breakfast feels especially peaceful this morning. The windows are filled not by mountains or endless fields, but by a constantly changing sequence of lakes and forest. A warm drink sits beside the plate. Beyond it, trees sweep past in gold and orange. A narrow lake follows the railway for several minutes, its dark surface interrupted by rocky islands and drifting mist. Then, forest closes around the train again. Another opening appears, another stretch of water. You begin to understand how enormous this lake country really is. There is always another shoreline beyond the trees, another hidden inlet, another body of water waiting around the next curve. Late in the morning, the train begins slowing again. A few buildings appear between the trees. Tracks multiply. Small railway structures sit beside the line, modest against the forest surrounding them. The settlement feels remote. Beyond the railway, only low buildings, autumn trees, and forested country are visible. The train comes to a gentle stop. Without the movement beneath you, the quiet seems even deeper here than it did in the larger cities. There are no tall buildings, no broad urban roads, only the railway, a small northern community, and enormous stretches of forest extending beyond it. For a little while, the train rests. Then the familiar movement returns. Beyond the settlement, wilderness returns almost immediately. The forest becomes continuous again. Mile after mile of spruce, pine, birch and maple follow the railway. At times, autumn color fills the whole view. At others, evergreens dominate, and the brighter trees appear only as narrow streaks of gold between them. Small lakes continue to interrupt the forest. Some are barely larger than ponds. Others open suddenly into broad expanses of dark water. Rocky islands appear everywhere. The scale is different from the prairies. There, distance came from uninterrupted horizons. Here, it comes from repetition. Forest, rock, water, again and again. And still the train continues east. You return once more to the dome car. From here, the scale of the forest becomes easier to understand. Trees surround the train in every direction. The curved glass reveals far more of the landscape than the cabin window could hold. Below, the silver train winds through a corridor of autumn color. Beyond it, lakes shine between the trees. Granite ridges rise gently from the forest, nowhere near the scale of the Rockies, but enough to break the horizon into long, low shapes. The sky remains soft and grey. Against it, the autumn colors seem even richer. From above the train, you watch the country unfold far ahead. The railway curves through forest until both rails disappear between the trees. Later, the forest opens onto one of the largest stretches of water you have seen since morning. The lake fills almost the entire view. Its surface is dark blue-gray beneath the cloud, textured gently by wind. Rocky islands sit far from shore. Some carry only a few twisted pines. Others are thick with autumn forest. The opposite shoreline is distant enough to soften into haze. For several minutes, the train remains close to the water. The lake appears through every break in the trees. Then the railway curves inland. Golden forest gathers beside the tracks. The broad water begins slipping away behind the rock. Soon, only a narrow blue-gray glimpse remains between the trunks. By afternoon, subtle signs of change begin appearing again. The forest remains thick. Lakes and granite are still frequent, but settlements appear a little more often now. Roads accompany the railway for longer stretches. Small groups of houses sit beside lakes or between wooded hills. The trees are changing too. Broadleaf forest becomes more common. Deep orange and muted red appear more frequently among the gold. The conifers remain, but no longer dominate every view. There is a sense that the train is slowly leaving the remoteness of northern Ontario behind. Not yet entering the south, but moving towards it. The wilderness is beginning to loosen. The railway follows another broad stretch of water. Here, the shoreline feels more settled. A few cottages appear between the trees. Small docks extend into quiet coves. A narrow road follows the opposite shore for a while before disappearing into the woodland. The autumn colors have reached their richest point of the journey. Gold covers whole hillsides. Orange gathers close to the water. Red maples stand among them in occasional bright groups. Yet dark pines remain scattered throughout, keeping the landscape grounded in the north. The train moves steadily beside the lake. Sunlight briefly finds a gap in the cloud and touches the far shore. For a few moments, the colors seem to glow. Then the cloud closes again. The landscape begins opening again. Forest no longer presses constantly against the railway. Fields return between wooded sections. Roads become busier. Farmhouses appear at shorter intervals. Small towns pass more frequently than before. The change is gradual, but after so many miles of northern wilderness, it feels unmistakable. Power lines follow the railway. Larger roads cross above it. Industrial buildings occasionally appear beyond autumn trees. The horizon is still softened by woodland, but the sense of remoteness has gone. Toronto is no longer an abstract destination somewhere far to the east. For the first time, it feels genuinely closer. Eventually, open country begins disappearing almost completely. Neighborhoods gather beside the railway. Roads multiply. Industrial buildings occupy longer stretches of land. Parallel tracks appear again. Freight yards spread into the distance. The train begins slowing as the railway corridor grows busier. Through gaps between buildings, the city seems to extend endlessly. Apartment blocks rise above the lower streets. Bridges carry traffic across the tracks. Autumn trees remain everywhere, pockets of yellow, orange, and red held between concrete, rail, and road. After days of mountains, prairies, forest, and lakes, the scale of Toronto feels almost startling. The journey is approaching its final miles. The city closes around the railway. Buildings rise higher now. Tracks multiply beneath bridges and beside long platforms. The movement of the train becomes noticeably slower. For the first time, glimpses of Toronto's central skyline appear ahead between the railway structures. After so many days of landscape stretching beyond the window, the vertical city feels almost unfamiliar. Glass towers rise beneath the grey sky. Traffic moves on elevated roads. Railway signals and junctions guide the train through the final approach. Inside, the cabin remains exactly as it has for thousands of miles. Blue seat, cream bedding, wooden table, warm lamp. The little room that left Vancouver beneath rain is still carrying you now. Only the world outside has changed. At last, the movement beneath you begins to disappear. The train glides alongside the platform. The final tracks move slowly past the window. Then everything becomes still. After days of constant motion, the silence feels remarkable. Outside, Toronto surrounds the station. Glass, stone, railway lines and city buildings fill the view. The journey that began beside a rain-darkened street in Vancouver has carried you across an entire country. Through wet forests, along mountain rivers, beneath the Rockies, across the enormous prairies, through autumn lakes and granite wilderness, and finally, here. Inside the cabin, the lamp still glows. The bedding remains neatly beside the window. For a little while, there is no reason to leave. You simply sit within the small room that has become so familiar and listen to the absence of movement beneath the floor. Outside lies Toronto. Behind you lies Canada. And for this quiet moment, the journey is complete.